DraftKings, and they made a deal with Anthony Joshua.
Yeah.
It's like, let's bankrupt
give you
these
$100 million.
Yeah. Let's bankrupt these motherfuckers. We're going to bet it all on me. I mean, that's like a Guy Ritchie movie,
It is.
you know?
You're an absolute idiot. There was no reason for, first of all, you go to jail. Why would Netflix, the biggest streaming platform in the world, partake in anything like that? Just use your brain. And MVP, too much to lose. You go to jail. Federal effing prison.
Jake Paul's a fraud in terms of boxing. But worse than that, after all his hype about what he was going to do to Joshua, what did we see? We saw a cowardly display from a guy who shouldn't be anywhere near a boxing ring.
All right, listen up, because Joe Rogan just went absolutely nuclear on Jake Paul, and what he's revealing about alleged bribery attempts before the Anthony Joshua fight is sending shockwaves through the entire boxing world. We're talking about accusations that Jake Paul tried to throw money at this fight to secure a favorable outcome, and Rogan is not holding back. He's calling it a disgrace to the sport, questioning the integrity of the entire matchup, and exposing what he believes was a calculated scheme to manipulate one of the biggest boxing events of the year. And trust me, after you hear what Rogan and other industry insiders are saying, you're going to see this fight in a completely different light. Here's what's really going on behind the scenes. According to Joe Rogan and multiple analysts who've been dissecting this fight, there were serious questions about a massive $100 million deal that was allegedly made with Anthony Joshua. Now, let me be crystal clear. Rogan isn't saying Joshua took a bribe or threw the fight. In fact, he's praising Joshua for staying focused and not falling for any schemes. But what Rogan is exposing is that Jake Paul's team allegedly tried to set up conditions that would guarantee Jake wouldn't get completely demolished, and those attempts are what's causing the controversy. Rogan said throwing money at a fighter to secure favorable outcomes damages the credibility of boxing matches, and he's calling out everyone involved for even entertaining these kinds of discussions. The conspiracy theories started flying immediately after the fight because of how it played out. Jake Paul survived 6 rounds against a 2-time heavyweight world champion with Olympic gold.
Not for Jake Paul.
Of course, that'd be awesome. I'm
Not
saying
for
for
all the
Anthony
young
Joshua,
bucks.
who was gonna be the guy.
Destroy some sports books also, apparently.
What are those odds?
they lose $100 million or something, I think.
Yeah.
That's where.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Might take a
people
dive
betting on
there.
the Jake Paul underdog right now.
There's people betting on him?
Yeah, because he's got that's plus 650. You're making 6 times
Yeah.
the money you put in.
Yeah, but what are the odds?
I mean,
Really?
not good.
What are the odds, really? I know that's I literally said, what are the odds to the odds?
Yeah.
And knockout power that's put professional fighters to sleep. Most people predicted Jake would be out in 2.5 rounds, but instead, he made it to round 6 before finally getting caught. And that's where the suspicion comes in. Why did it take Anthony Joshua so long to finish someone who clearly had no business being in the ring with him? Was Joshua holding back intentionally? Was there some kind of understanding about how the fight would play out? And most importantly, did money change hands to ensure certain outcomes? Joe Rogan addressed this head-on and said the only reason betting odds weren't 40-1 in Joshua's favor is because people suspected shenanigans. He used that exact word, shenanigans.
That's why I think the only reason the odds are not 40-1 is
People suspect shenanigans.
shenanigans.
Yeah. They suspect shenanigans.
But a first
if they
round.
come out and fucking circle each other like pro wrestling and grab the ropes, we're going to be like,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. Yes.
You motherfuckers.
When Nate fought him, that was great.
Well, listen, that's another fight. Look, Nate, no disrespect to Nate, but Nate fought his career at 155 pounds for the most part. A couple fights at 170.
Yeah.
You know, a very good box.
He said, "When you see a matchup this lopsided and the odds don't reflect the obvious skill gap, it means bettors think something fishy is going on." And apparently, there was massive betting action on Jake Paul as the underdog at plus 650, meaning people were making 6 times their money if Jake won. Some reports claimed sportsbooks like DraftKings stood to lose $100 million if Jake pulled off an upset. And that's where the conspiracy theory really takes off. Did Jake Paul and his team make a deal with betting companies or with Joshua himself to manipulate the outcome? Rogan was quick to shut down the most extreme versions of this theory. He said anyone suggesting Netflix, the biggest streaming platform in the world, would participate in fixing a fight is an absolute idiot. He pointed out that everyone involved,
Idiot. There was no reason for, first of all, you go to jail. Why would Netflix, the biggest streaming platform in the world, partake in anything like that? Just use your brain. And MVP, too much to lose. You go to jail. Federal effing prison. AJ, for what? For what? He doesn't need it. He doesn't need more money. It's great, but to risk this? No. Look at what's going on with the gambling. No way. There's no way. My respect for Jake has grown. I know people don't like to give him credit. You fight amateur, influencer, pro boxing. You have my respect. I don't care what kind of fighter you are. I don't care how many wins you have. You step through those ropes. You have my respect. He lasted 6 rounds. Most didn't think he would. I think the line as far as how many rounds was 2.5. So clearly most people thought he would be out of there around that point. And I think a lot of people were going with the under. He had some moments. He had the antics. Obviously the takedowns and all that weren't great. But golly, I think he was tired. The ring was bigger, and everyone said that was going to benefit him, the 22x22 ring. But cardio has been an issue for him. And so when you're circling and dancing, you're going to get tired. You're going to gas out. And I think that happened. Arms were down, and he was getting pinned. He was getting cornered, and he was getting, AJ was doing a great job, I think, of not letting the fight be contested in the middle of the ring, cornering him either in the middle, like the turnbuckle, or up against the ropes. He was cutting him off perfectly. And so I know people are going to be upset that AJ didn't get rid of him.
Netflix, MVP Promotions, Anthony Joshua, has way too much to lose. You go to federal prison for fixing fights. This isn't some underground event. This was a globally broadcast boxing match with millions of dollars on the line and massive public scrutiny. So the idea that they would risk everything for a rigged outcome doesn't make logical sense. But what Rogan is suggesting is that Jake Paul's team may have tried to negotiate certain conditions, protections, or agreements that would give Jake a better chance of surviving longer than he should have. Ariel Helwani jumped into the conversation and provided some important context. He pointed out that Anthony Joshua didn't take unnecessary risks for money because he already has enough wealth. Joshua's focus was on preserving his legacy, not chasing a payday. By staying cautious and measured in the fight, Joshua protected both his reputation and the sport itself. Helwani warned that if Joshua had been reckless, or if he'd taken a dive for money, it would have damaged boxing's credibility forever and set a dangerous precedent. Instead, Joshua's approach ensured a respectable contest that demonstrated he values honor and legacy over short-term financial gain.
Observation at the very top of this agenda, it's so difficult to pin him down. He runs, he dodges, he grabs, he slithers to the floor, he grips onto your legs, all the kind of stuff that you would never see from anybody with a semblance of experience in boxing. So let's get this out of the way. Jake Paul's a fraud in terms of boxing. But worse than that, after all his hype about what he was going to do to Joshua, what did we see? We saw a cowardly display from a guy who shouldn't be anywhere near a boxing ring from now on. In fact, if there hadn't been ropes around that ring, then he would have been back in the changing room in the first couple of minutes of the contest because he was running for his life. He was terrified. Let's look at AJ's performance. Let me say it's extremely difficult to box against somebody who doesn't want to engage, who doesn't want to actually come and fight, and that's what they were there for. But Paul made up his mind long before this fight took place. I will run for eight rounds, and I can go and put on my resume that I went 8 rounds, the full distance, with the former heavyweight champion of the world. Finally, let's hope this is the end of Jake Paul as a so-called boxer. He never will be a boxer. I've got guys whom I train up and down the country who would flatten him in 3 rounds. Amateur boxers who are miles better than he is. He has got nothing going for him.
But here's where things get really interesting. Multiple analysts, including Spencer Fearon and Frank Warren, suggested that Anthony Joshua may have subconsciously held back during the bout. Fearon believes that if Joshua had unleashed his full power from the start, he could have easily finished Jake Paul in the first round. But there was something in Joshua's mindset that made him carry Jake for a few rounds. Possibly because completely destroying him in 60 seconds wouldn't have looked good for the promotion or for boxing in general. This raises uncomfortable questions. Was Joshua instructed to let the fight go longer? Was there pressure from promoters to create more entertainment value? Or did Joshua genuinely struggle to corner someone who was running and evading like his life depended on it? Frank Warren, who has over 70 years of boxing experience, was absolutely brutal in his assessment. He called Jake Paul a fraud and a clown who has no place near serious competition. He said Jake's performance was cowardly, embarrassing, and disrespectful to the sport. Warren pointed out that Jake spent 6 rounds running for his life, dodging, grabbing, slithering to the floor, and doing everything possible to avoid actually fighting.
I mean, yeah, like you said, did it go 6 rounds and last, a few longer? I'll give credit to Jake for hanging in there. Part of it was because he employed an extremely unfriendly for fans style, but it was the only way he could do it if he wanted to survive that many rounds, which is to basically get on his bicycle and ride around the ring for a bunch of rounds and then get off his bicycle and run, like a criminal at night after the cops show up. So it is what it is. I mean, it'll be the fact that it still resonated shows you the interest that there was in the fight, and certainly that knockout was a viral clip. And and I'll quote the great philosopher Eddie Hearn. We're going to take care of Jake Paul and on to the real boxing in 2026.
Yeah, the great philosopher.
It is a risky fight. I mean, I'll put it like this. It's one thing to say I want to do a calendar year where I'm fighting Fabio Wardley for his title, and then I'm going to fight Fury. There's nothing wrong with that. But anybody that would consider Fabio Wardley at this stage should be a tuna fight is just not being honest about it. It's a real fight. And I think there are some people out there that would say it poses just as much danger as risk or a gamble or however you want to describe it as it would be when if he fights Tyson Fury. So Joshua has to make some decisions about that. I don't think they're going to take that risky of a fight going into the prospect of a Fury fight. I mean, it's fun for us to sit here and bullshit about it, but I just don't think that's legitimate. I don't think that's real. I mean, I understand why Frank Warren and Fabio Wardley and their group would want that. They would welcome that fight because it's a winnable fight, and it's a bonanza in terms of compared to whatever money Fabio Wardley has made in his career so far. But if you're Joshua...
He said amateur boxers he trains would flatten Jake in 3 rounds, and the only reason Jake lasted as long as he did was because Joshua had difficulty dealing with someone who refused to engage. Warren emphasized that it's always easier to beat someone who comes to win than someone who comes to survive, and Jake's entire strategy was pure survival. Dan Rafael provided a more balanced analysis, giving Jake credit for executing an extremely defensive and unpopular style that was the only way to last multiple rounds. He compared Jake's constant movement to riding a bicycle and evading like a criminal running from cops, emphasizing how this approach prolonged the fight. But Rafael also pointed out that Joshua could have done a better job cutting off the ring and acknowledged his own role in why the contest lasted longer than expected. Despite this, Rafael praised Joshua's knockout as impressive and deserved.
You know what, I'm glad that Andy Joshua came out and said that it wasn't the best performance straight away. It's the first thing that came out of his mouth. So when I was saying what I was saying about the fight, I thought it was a very lackluster performance. I thought his performance wasn't that good. I'm glad that he addressed that, you know, because people don't like, you say something about, oh, you're hating, blah, 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 blah. No, I'm not hating. We have to call it into its context, and its context is this: Anti-Yard went 6 rounds with a YouTuber, right? He was polished on certain things that he was doing, but there's something inside me that said, like, there was an unconscious bias in his mindset to say, I'm going to carry him a few rounds, because if I just go out there and blast him out in 1 round, it ain't going to look good. And I think Joshua subconsciously carried Jake Paul, because I think if Joshua went bing bing and went out straight away bombing, right, he could have easily dispatched of Jake Paul. But in the same thing, we have to give credit to Jake Paul in he had a very decent game plan. When people say, oh, well, you just came, you ran, what else is he meant to do? Anthony Joshua is, just out of curiosity, what else did Jake Paul meant to do? Jake Paul, for crying out loud, you lost to Tommy Fury, for crying out loud. Let's be real. Let's call it as it is. Even though he's made massive improvements. So, I mean, Jalen Love, who's working with, I know Jalen for a long time, so massive big up to those guys. You know, he's vastly improved, right? And do not be surprised if they don't slip him in for a cruiserweight world title shot against a WBC champion, and him not coming out victorious. I've said it.
While also highlighting Joshua's honesty in assessing his own performance afterward. What really fueled the conspiracy theories was how quickly and openly Anthony Joshua admitted his performance wasn't his best. Immediately after the fight, the first thing out of his mouth was criticism of his own execution. He said he should have finished Jake faster, that his performance was lackluster, and that he didn't cut off the ring effectively. That level of honesty is rare in boxing, and it made people wonder if Joshua was subtly admitting he held back intentionally. Because if a 2-time heavyweight world champion with elite skills genuinely struggled to finish a YouTuber-turned-boxer in 6 rounds, that raises serious questions about what was really happening in that ring. Joey Knight added another layer to this discussion.
For him in terms of what he's doing in the boxing ring.
Listen, so long as people will tune in and so long as Jake Paul is paid by Netflix or any broadcaster to air his fights, we're going to see this continue. And Jake Paul knows his business model, right? Now, this deviated, this AJ fight, which came together kind of last minute after the Tank Davis fight fell apart. But we know Jake Paul's MO here. It's find the most popular guy with the most physical disadvantages for me to fight. And Jake Paul has the benefit that he's turned himself into a villain, or in the pro wrestling circles, a heel. People tune in to watch. We did not tune into this fight to see competitive boxing. Most of us tuned in because we thought, here's Anthony Joshua. Here's a 2-time unified heavyweight champion, a guy who physically just overwhelms Jake Paul. And we're finally going to get what Tyron Woodley and Anderson Silva, Nate Diaz were not physically fit, whether it be through their size, experience, or age, to do, and that is knock out Jake Paul. And so, because I don't really feel like we got that satisfying comeuppance that a lot of people have been waiting for, it kind of gives Jake Paul a little bit of mystique, I'd almost say, to still try and string this along. Now, I don't know in terms, he says he wants to be cruiserweight champion. I'm not quite sure what the competitive road there is, because let's make no mistake, the reason this fight lasted as long as it did is because Jake Paul focused exclusively on being elusive. He did his best, and kudos to him, right? He did a great job of not getting cornered. He was always on the gas until the gas sort of fell out from underneath him. And so I don't quite know, short of leveraging his popularity, how he's going to get to that title shot if he's not actually going to fight, like really fight, an elite boxer. But if he's looking to make money, there's the KSI fight out there, there's the Tommy Fury rematch. There is ways for Jake Paul to sustain.
By pointing out that Jake Paul got up from a massive right hand that would have knocked out most professional heavyweights. He referenced how that same punch from Joshua knocked Robert Helenius completely unconscious, and Helenius was allegedly on performance-enhancing drugs at the time. So the fact that Jake took that shot, hit the canvas, and still made it back to his feet before the 10 count was actually impressive. Knight said this proves Jake has genuine toughness and mental resilience, even if his boxing skills are nowhere near elite level. Dillian Whyte openly admitted he was surprised Jake lasted as long as he did. He acknowledged that Jake had virtually no chance against Joshua, but expressed shock at how Jake managed to keep moving and stay upright into the later rounds. White's observations raised questions about whether the fight was being managed carefully or if strategic considerations were at play to prolong the contest. He emphasized that Jake's endurance and ability to stay on his feet, even temporarily, showed mental toughness. But he also left room for debate.
Took a dive or anything like that, but you can go over. People can't question you too much, but fuck me, it's not like taking a big old punishing right hand from AJ. And speaking of the right hand that AJ gave to Jake Paul, listen, Jake Paul was up at the 10 count. I see AJ give that same right hand to Robert Helenius, and he was out for the count, and he was juicing. So that's a win there for Jake Paul. And you know what, yeah? When we speak about like the sparring stories before the fight, I just thought, nah, they're talking shit. Hold my hands up. I had it wrong. Lawrence Okoli weren't talking shit. I'm sure Jake Paul did win a round or two against Lawrence Okoli. We've just seen him do it against Anthony Joshua there. So I think that then moves us on to Anthony Joshua, and we've got to speak about Anthony Joshua. Listen, I do think that you box to the level that's in front of you sometimes. If you see me in the gym sparring with professionals, I look way better in those spars than I do sparring against amateurs that have had one fight or something like that, because they're not orthodox. They don't do things the way you're expecting them to. And also, we've got to mention the fact that despite there now being a probably plethora of highlight reel shots for Jake Paul to be able to clip up, he probably landed 15, 16 shots in total on Anthony Joshua, or about that. Despite there being loads of that he'll clip up and use and stuff like that, let's not rewrite history with this fight. This fight was Jake Paul coming and running. Now, there's a style of running, and if you're ever going to run, do the one that Jake Paul done just now, because he did still let off multiple big power shots. A couple of his shots he landed with double jabs, and it would only be the second land, but he did still let off multiple big power shots. He had a go. He had as much
about the unusual pacing and dynamics of the bout. The broader point Joe Rogan and others are making is that crossover boxing has created an environment where questions about integrity are inevitable. When you match a legitimate world champion against an influencer with minimal professional experience, and the fight goes longer than it should, people are going to ask uncomfortable questions. Did money influence the outcome? Were there behind-the-scenes agreements? Was the fight stretched out for entertainment value and betting manipulation? And while there's no concrete evidence proving any of this, the fact that these questions are being asked so loudly tells you everything about how damaged the credibility of these crossover events has become. If this breakdown just exposed what nobody's talking about, smash that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe, because we're bringing you every explosive detail as this story continues to unfold. The real truth about what happened in that ring is just beginning to surface, so stay tuned.
Jake Paul stands no chance, but then I watched it the next month, I was like, he actually did way better than I thought he would have did. But people forget Jake Paul rusted Ohio State wrestling, so he's tough. He's not as good boxer, as good skill, but he's tough. You know, wrestling is a very competitive sport in America, and to be Ohio State wrestling level, you have to be they're physically tough and physically strong. You know, so yeah, he was tough. That's why he survived in there. He did what he had to do in there. He got tagged with a few shots, and he did extremely well. AJ did poor.
In those situations where the fighter is that negative and had those kind of tactics, he went to ground a few times, etc. I don't think people quite understand it. It doesn't matter who you are, it's quite difficult. People expect AJ within 20 seconds to literally, with the first punch thrown or the first jab thrown, just to knock him out. It's not that easy, is it, when a fighter is kind of going in there to just survive?
It's always easier to beat someone that's coming to win than someone that's in there to survive, but